The magic coin. Finn Calloway turned 22 on a Tuesday, and nobody remembered. Not a text, not a voicemail, not even one of those auto-generated social media notifications. Because Finn had quietly deleted all his accounts 8 months ago after a string of particularly invisible birthdays made the silence harder to look at. At least when you weren't on the apps, you could tell yourself the world hadn't forgotten you. It just hadn't had the chance to find you yet. He sat at the edge of his twin bed in the apartment he shared with 2 roommates he barely spoke to, eating a bowl of cereal that had gone soggy while he stared at the water stain on the ceiling. It was shaped like a cloud, or maybe a dog, or maybe nothing at all, just a stain. His diploma from Garfield University sat in its cardboard tube in a corner of the room, still rolled up, still sealed with the gold sticker the registrar had pressed on 2 months ago. He hadn't found a reason to open it yet. He had a communications degree. He had $23 in his checking account. He had a part-time job at a copy shop that smelled like warm toner and the slow death of ambition. It wasn't that Finn was unlikable. That was the strange thing, the thing that made it worse. When people actually talked to him, actually stopped and looked at him for a second, they usually said he seemed like a good guy. A genuinely good guy. He held doors for strangers without expecting anything back. He remembered people's names. He tipped 20% even when he could barely afford the meal. He returned shopping carts to the cart returned instead of leaving them in the middle of the parking lot like some kind of animal. But good didn't seem to be enough. Good guys finish last, if they finished at all. More often, they just sort of drifted, moving through the world like a leaf on the surface of a still pond. Technically present, not really going anywhere. That was Finn, a leaf on a still pond. His shift at the copy shop ended at 6. He'd spent most of the day running off 500 flyers for a used furniture sale, loading paper into the tray over and over, while his coworker Darnell played music from a Bluetooth speaker and didn't invite him into the conversation he was having with the other guy, Marcus. They weren't mean about it, they just weren't thinking about him. Nobody was ever mean about it, they just weren't thinking. On the walk home, he passed the park on Elmwood Avenue, the one with the little fountain at the center of the courtyard, the one surrounded by a knee-high stone wall and a few benches where old men played chess on warm afternoons. The fountain had been there longer than anyone he knew could remember. Locals called it the Wishmaker, though the city had never put up a sign with that name. It had just become what people called it, the way things sometimes earn their names through repetition rather than authority. The water caught the last light of the evening in a way that made it look like it was holding something inside it. Gold threads, almost. Finn had walked past this fountain maybe 200 times in his life, and had never paid it much attention. But tonight, he stopped. He stood there for a moment, hands in the pockets of his jacket, watching the water tumble over the stone lip and fall into the basin below. The surface was thick with coins. Hundreds of them. Pennies mostly, but some dimes and quarters. A few foreign coins he didn't recognize. Even a folded dollar bill that had survived somehow and pressed itself flat against the stone floor of the basin. People had been wishing here for a long time. Finn reached into his pocket and found what was there. A quarter, a gas station receipt, and a single old coin he didn't recognize. He must have gotten it as change somewhere. It was thicker than a quarter, darker, with no clear markings he could make out in the dim light. Just smooth on one side, and on the other, something that might have been a face, or might have been a sun, worn down too much to say for certain. He held it in his palm for a second. "I just want things to go right," he said quietly. Not performing it, not being dramatic, just saying the thing that was true. The thing he carried around with him everywhere and never said out loud. Just one day where things go right. He tossed the coin. It caught the light on the way down, one brief flash of gold, and then disappeared beneath the surface, without a sound, as if the water had simply absorbed it. Finn stood there for another second, then turned and walked home. He ate cold leftover rice for dinner. He went to sleep at 10. He didn't think about the coin again. Finn's alarm went off at 7:45, same as always. And he lay there in the gray morning light for the usual 30 seconds of staring at the ceiling before deciding whether getting up was worth it. He voted yes, as he always did, because he was practical even when he was miserable, and he swung his legs over the side of the bed. His phone buzzed. He picked it up. The notification was from his bank app, and for a split second, his stomach did the thing it always did, a cold little drop, the anticipation of bad news. But the notification read, "Deposit received, $47. Overpayment refund, Garfield University." He stared at it. $47 from the university. He hadn't even known he had an overpayment. He'd assumed colleges just kept extra money. He'd never heard of one sending it back. He shook his head, set the phone down, and went to make coffee. The coffee was good. Really good, actually. The same cheap grounds he always used. But somehow this morning, the ratio was perfect. The water temperature right, the mug warm in his hand in a way that felt intentional. He stood in the small kitchen in his socked feet, and drank it slowly while the morning light came through the window at exactly the right angle and turned the dust motes in the air into something that looked almost like snow. He thought, On the way to the bus stop, a car going through the intersection had the music up. Something bright and urgent and half familiar. A song Finn had been trying to remember the name of for weeks. He caught maybe 12 seconds of it through the open window before the car was gone. He pulled out his phone and hummed the melody into the sound recognition app, and it found it immediately. Lucky Now by Ryan Adams. He downloaded it on the spot and listened to it for the rest of the walk. And it fit the morning so perfectly, it was almost suspicious. At the bus stop, a woman he didn't know smiled at him. Not a polite courtesy smile, the kind people offer when they accidentally make eye contact and want to signal they're not a threat. A real smile, the kind you give someone you're genuinely glad to see. He must have looked confused, because she laughed softly. "Sorry," she said, "you just look exactly like my brother, in a good way." "Oh," he said, "I'll take it." She laughed again. The bus came. The thing with Maya happened at 11:15. Maya Reyes was someone Finn had met exactly once, 3 weeks ago, at the farewell party his college friend group had thrown for a guy named Derek, who was moving to Portland. Maya was Derek's friend, not Finn's, and she'd arrived late and stood near the kitchen doorway with a glass of white wine and something thoughtful in her eyes that Finn had noticed from across the room. They'd ended up talking for 40 minutes about the specific sadness of finishing a book you love, about whether cities have personalities, about whether it was embarrassing to cry at commercials. She said no, emphatically. He said he'd been asking himself the same thing for years. Then Derek needed help loading boxes into his car, and Finn had gone outside, and by the time he came back in, Maya was gone. No number, no last name. Just a 40-minute conversation that had been, quietly, one of the better 40 minutes of his recent life. His phone buzzed at 11:15. Maya. "Hey, this is Maya from Derek's party. I got your number from him. I know this is kind of out of nowhere, but I've been thinking about what you said about cities having personalities, and I just walked past a building that proved your point completely. Anyway, hi." Finn read it twice. Then he set his phone face down on the counter, pressed both hands flat on the surface, and breathed. He typed back, "Hi, tell me about the building." Her response came in under 30 seconds. They texted for 2 hours. By Thursday, Finn had started keeping a list. Not because he was the kind of person who kept lists, he wasn't typically, but because the things happening to him had begun to accumulate at a rate that felt like it required documentation. He didn't know what he was documenting it for. Evidence maybe, for himself, so that in the quiet moments when he might start to think he was imagining it, he could look at the list and confirm, no, this is real. This is happening. The list, in his notes app, read, $47 refund from school. Coffee perfect. Woman at bus stop smiled. Song I've been trying to remember. Afternoon, Maya texted. 2 hours. She's funny and kind and thinks about things. Found $20 bill in jacket pocket I'd forgotten about. Supervisor gave me extra hours without me asking. Evening. Landlord fixed the heat. Hadn't asked him to. It just got fixed. Every single door someone held for me. 4 separate people. One ran back after already passing through. Bank alerts, $112 customer loyalty adjustment from my phone carrier. Never heard of this. Maya and I made plans for Saturday. He looked at the list. He scrolled back through it slowly. Then he typed at the bottom, check the fountain. He went back to Elmwood Park that evening, in the soft gold light of early autumn, and stood at the stone wall of the Wishmaker fountain for a long time. The water looked the same. The coins on the floor of the basin looked the same. Pennies and dimes and quarters, and the scattered foreign pieces. He searched the bottom methodically with his eyes, moving across the surface in slow rows. And he found it. His coin, the dark one with the worn face, sitting slightly apart from the others, near the far edge of the basin. It hadn't been swept away with the others. It hadn't blended in. It sat there, alone, as if waiting. He didn't know what he believed, but he knew what his list said, and the list didn't lie. Finn was not by nature a superstitious person. He'd taken a philosophy of science class in college that had made him very confident about the difference between causation and correlation. But he also wasn't an idiot. When you throw a coin in a fountain and say, I just want things to go right, and then literally every single thing goes right for 4 straight days, you are allowed to at least entertain the hypothesis. He sat on the bench nearby and watched the water until the light faded. A pigeon landed on the stone wall a few feet from him and regarded him with the flat professional skepticism that pigeons bring to all situations. I know, Finn said to the pigeon. I know. The pigeon flew away. Finn went home and cleaned his apartment for the first time in 2 months, and when he finished, he stood in the middle of the clean room and felt something unfamiliar settle into his chest. Not happiness exactly, or maybe happiness exactly, but the quiet kind. The kind that didn't announce itself. The kind that just sat there and let you notice it on your own terms. The date. He was calling it a date by Saturday morning, a decision he'd made silently and without announcing it to anyone, went the way things do when luck is on your side, which is to say, everything that could have been awkward wasn't, and everything that could have gone wrong didn't. They met at noon at the farmer's market on 5th Street, the one with the old stone buildings on either side, and the tent canopies in faded red and green. She was already there when he arrived, holding a paper cup of something warm, wearing a green jacket he immediately thought suited her perfectly, though he wasn't going to say that out loud for at least 3 more dates. "You're early," she said. "So are you," he said. "I'm always early," she said. "I have anxiety about being late." "I'm never early," he said. "I'm not sure why I was today." Good sign. They walked for 3 hours. They ate empanadas from a cart and debated, with surprising intensity, the ethics of putting cheese on seafood. They found a booth selling vintage photographs, strangers from the 40s and 50s, posed in front of houses that probably didn't exist anymore, and spent 20 minutes inventing backstories for the people in them. An older man with a spectacular mustache became Eduardo, a retired magician with a complicated relationship to the truth. A woman in a polka dot dress became Rose, who had once driven cross-country alone in 1952 and never fully come back. "You're good at this," Maya said, holding a photograph of a man reading a newspaper in a hammock. "I have a lot of practice making things up," Finn said. "It's basically my primary skill." "That's not nothing." "No," he agreed. "It turns out it's not." She kissed him at 3:15 on the corner of 5th and Merchant, which he hadn't been expecting, though he immediately recognized it as something he'd been hoping for without quite admitting it to himself. It lasted about 4 seconds, and then she pulled back and looked at him with a measuring expression, the way you look at something to gauge whether it's what you thought it was. It seemed to be. "Good," she said softly. "Yeah," he said. Walking home, he thought about the coin. He thought about the fountain. He thought about the way he'd stood there in the fading light and said, without performance, "I'll just want things to go right." He thought, "Be careful." He didn't know why he thought it. The evening was perfect. His life was perfect. Or at least better than it had been in as long as he could remember. The coin was sitting at the bottom of the fountain being lucky. And he was here. And Maya existed. And $47 had arrived from nowhere. But something in him, the quiet, careful part that had learned to survive on small expectations, said, "Be careful." He went home. He added to the list. He fell asleep easily for the first time in months. Nobody would have called Conrad Voss unlucky. That was the thing that made him dangerous. In the end, he already had everything, and he still wanted more. More was the only word Conrad's life had ever really understood. He was 43, and he ran Voss Capital Group from the 14th floor of a building on the east side of downtown. And he wore suits that cost more than Finn made in a month. And he had the handshake of a man who had practiced handshakes. He had 2 houses, 1 car he actually drove, and 3 he didn't. And a reputation in local business circles as the kind of man you wanted in your corner and did not want against you. He also had a sister named Lena, who lived 3 blocks from Elmwood Park, and who on a Thursday afternoon in the middle of October called him with an excitement in her voice that he hadn't heard since they were kids. "You have to come see this fountain," she said. "Something's been happening around here. People have been, Conrad. Just listen. 3 weeks ago, I threw a coin in and wished for the Harris account to come through. And it did, the same week. And Julie next door did it. And her son got the job he'd been interviewing for. And the Petersons wished for Lena. I know how it sounds. It sounds like a coincidence. 5 people from the same block, Conrad, in 3 weeks." Silence on the line. Conrad was many things, but dismissive of patterns was not one of them. He built his entire career on recognizing patterns before other people did. "I'll come by," he said. He stood at the fountain on a Friday evening in a suit that did not belong in a park, hands clasped behind his back, and studied the water with the concentrated attention of a man conducting an audit. What he saw, after looking for a few minutes, was what anyone with good eyes would have seen. The coin near the far edge of the basin, slightly apart, a little darker than the others, a little too still for the way the water moved around it. Conrad reached into his pocket and found a coin. He had to dig. He rarely carried cash, and held it over the water. He didn't say anything out loud. Conrad didn't perform wishes. He formed them with precision, in the private interior of his mind where nobody could see. "I want the Meridian deal to close by end of month. I want the city council vote to go my way. I want the Kellner property." 3 things: specific, measurable, achievable through luck, if luck were real. He dropped the coin. He went home. He sat in his leather chair and thought about patterns and power, and what it would mean if it were true. By Monday, 2 of the 3 things had begun to move. By Wednesday, Conrad Voss was standing at the fountain again, this time with a legal pad and a pen. Finn noticed it first in the small ways, which was how most terrible things announce themselves, quietly, through the minor key, before the full orchestra arrives. It was a Tuesday, 3.5 weeks after the coin. and he was walking to the bus stop when he realized the particular light he'd come to love on his morning commute. The one that came through the gap between the apartment buildings at exactly the right angle and made everything look like it was in a film, wasn't there. Gray sky, flat light, nothing. It was stupid. He knew it was stupid. Weather wasn't magic. But then 2 days later, Maya didn't text back for 6 hours, which she never did. And when she did text back, it was brief in a way that didn't feel like her. And the bank notification he got that evening wasn't a deposit. It was a charge he didn't recognize. A small one, $18, but in the wrong direction. And his supervisor at the copy shop told him the extra hours were being cut back. Budget reasons, no hard feelings. And the doors stopped being held. He went to the fountain on a Thursday evening and stood at the stone wall and looked into the basin, and the coin was still there. But it looked different somehow. Not physically, it was the same coin, the same worn face or sun on one side, the same smooth reverse. But the water around it felt different, agitated almost. The ripples moving through the fountain seemed to originate from it rather than from the water source, which made no sense. And Finn rubbed his eyes and looked again, and the ripples were normal, emanating from the nozzle at the center the way they always had. He was losing his mind. That was the rational explanation. He turned to leave and almost walked into a man in an expensive suit, who was coming through the park gate with purpose, carrying what looked like a leather journal, moving toward the fountain with the focused energy of someone who had done this before and planned to do it again. They made brief eye contact. The man nodded, the quick, transactional nod of someone who notices your presence and files you immediately under not relevant, and moved around Finn to the fountain wall. Finn stopped, turned, watched. The man opened a leather journal. It was a notebook, Finn could see now, with handwriting dents on every page, and consulted it. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and produced not one coin, but several, held in his palm. 5, maybe 6 coins. He held them over the water, and his lips moved silently, and he dropped them all at once. They fell in a cluster, hitting the surface in a tight spread, and the sound they made was somehow louder than it should have been. A sound Finn felt in his chest more than heard with his ears. The man made a note in the journal, uncapped his pen, capped the pen, turned and walked out of the park without looking at Finn again. Finn stood at the fountain and stared at the coins the man had dropped. They were arranged in the basin in a neat arc around the far edge, as if the water had placed them deliberately, as if they had organized themselves. And Finn's coin, the dark one, was no longer alone near the far edge. It was surrounded, enclosed. The new coins had landed in a ring around it. The Wishmaker had been built for ordinary people and ordinary wants. What Conrad Voss was doing to it was something else entirely. Finn went home and searched the local business pages for Man in Suit Elmwood Park Fountain, which was not a useful search. But then he went to the city's business registry and searched for recent permit applications near Elmwood, and found a name attached to a development proposal for the land 3 blocks east of the park. Voss Capital Group. He sat with that for a moment. Then he began to read. It took 4 days of research, the kind of slow, methodical research that Finn was actually quite good at, the kind nobody gave him credit for because nobody was paying attention, to understand what Conrad Voss was doing and why the fountain was being drained of whatever it had. What he found, piecing together city council minutes and business filings and a few conversations with Lena's neighbor Julie, who it turned out was a retired accountant and very willing to talk to a polite young man with good questions, was this. Conrad Voss had been visiting the fountain every other day for 3 weeks. He was not making modest wishes. He was making strategic ones. Wishes designed not to improve his life, but to tilt entire systems in his favor. The city council vote he needed wasn't about one property. It was about a rezoning deal that would displace 6 small businesses and a community garden that had been on that block for 15 years. The Meridian deal he'd wished for involved a company whose workers had been trying to unionize. The deal, if it closed, would effectively prevent that. The Kellner property he wanted was owned by an elderly woman who, according to public record, had not agreed to sell. He was using luck as leverage. He was wishing for wins that required other people to lose. And the fountain, Finn could feel it, in the way you sometimes feel things in your chest before your brain catches up, was responding. Not eagerly, not willingly, but responding. Because that was what it did. It had been built, or had grown, or had simply become, out of the accumulated weight of human wanting. It didn't distinguish between Finn wanting a good day and Conrad Voss wanting a monopoly. It just gave what was asked. Finn also found, in a 50-year-old issue of the local Historical Society's quarterly newsletter, archived online, it is scanned so poor he had to read it twice. A 3-paragraph note about the fountain, written by a woman named Margaret Ashby, who had apparently been the city's unofficial historian for decades. It said, "The old coin at the basin's east edge predates the fountain's construction by at least a century. Several residents have noted it does not move with the others. Local tradition holds that whoever placed it there was either very lucky or very wise, and that the fountain's power is borrowed from it, And that power borrowed too heavily and too greedily has a way of returning to its source all at once. Finn read that last line 3 times. Power borrowed too heavily and too greedily has a way of returning to its source all at once. He knew what he had to do. He didn't particularly want to do it, because what it required was going back to the fountain, reaching into the water, and taking his coin back. The coin he'd thrown with an honest wish. The coin that had apparently been the anchor for all of it. The original source. Without it, the fountain would be an ordinary fountain. Voss's coins would just be coins. His wishes would just be wishes, answered only by the usual unreliable mechanisms of hard work and circumstance. And Finn's run of perfect days would end. He sat with that for a long time. He thought about Maya. He thought about the doors being held. He thought about the coffee being perfect, and the song finding him at exactly the right moment, and $47 from the sky. He thought about the 6 small businesses, the community garden, the woman who didn't want to sell her house. He went to get his coat. He didn't expect Conrad Voss to be there. He should have. It was a Wednesday evening, and the pattern Julie had described put Voss at the fountain on Mondays and Wednesdays. Finn had done the math and then forgotten it in his nerves. And so when he came through the park gate and found the man in the expensive suit already standing at the stone wall, journal open, pen in hand, Finn stopped walking and stood on the path and simply stared. Voss heard his footsteps stop and turned. He recognized Finn. That much was clear from the slight sharpening of his expression, as the young man he'd seen here before. He didn't say anything. He waited, with the patient confidence of a man who had learned that most people, faced with his full attention, would decide they had somewhere else to be. Finn walked to the fountain. "This is a public park," Voss said. "Not threatening, just establishing." "I know," Finn said. "I'm not here to stop you from being here." "Then what are you here for?" Finn looked into the water. He found his coin near the east edge, still sitting in the ring of Voss's coins, surrounded but not moved. "I'm here for that one," Finn said, and pointed. Voss looked at the coin. Something moved behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe. The same recognition Finn had felt looking at it the first time. The sense that it was different from the others. "What's special about it?" "It's mine." "You can't take coins out of a fountain. It's considered bad luck." A slight smile. He was testing. "I think the bad luck's been flowing the other direction lately," Finn said. "I know what you've been doing here. I know about the rezoning vote and the Meridian deal and Mrs. Kellner's house." The smile stayed, but it cooled by several degrees. "You've been doing research." "I have a communications degree and nothing else to do," Finn said. "Turns out that's actually enough." Silence. The fountain ran. Somewhere in the park, a dog was barking at something it found interesting. "That coin isn't yours anymore," Voss said. "You threw it away." "I made a wish with it. I didn't give it to you." Voss closed his notebook. He looked at Finn for a long moment with the direct, measuring assessment of someone taking inventory. And what he found in Finn's face seemed to surprise him slightly. Not the argument, but the steadiness behind it. The absence of the flinch he'd expected. "You know you'll lose whatever it's been giving you," he said. "Yeah," said Finn, "I know." He reached into the fountain. The water was cold, shockingly cold for an October evening. Colder than it should have been. And the coins on the bottom shifted slightly under his fingers as he searched, scattering and resettling in a way that reminded him of the sound of cards being shuffled. His fingers found the dark coin by feel more than sight, because it felt different from the others. Smoother, warmer, despite the cold water, slightly heavier than its size suggested. He closed his hand around it and lifted it out. The water in the fountain went still. Not gradually, not the way water settles when you stop disturbing it. All at once, completely, like a switch thrown. The ripples stopped. The surface became a mirror. The coins on the bottom held perfectly in place. And the light in the water went from ordinary water light to something flatter. Something that was just reflection and nothing else. Voss took a step back. Finn opened his hand and looked at the coin in his palm. In the last light of the evening, it looked like an ordinary old coin, worn smooth by decades of handling and years of water. Whatever he'd thought he'd seen in it before, the warmth, the faint suggestion of a face or a sun, was gone. It was just a coin. An old, unremarkable coin that someone had once carried and eventually lost. He looked at Conrad Voss. The man was staring at the still water with an expression that Finn had never seen on a face that had looked so composed. A flash of something naked, something undone. The expression of someone who had been leaning against a wall and felt it move. "The council vote is on the 14th, Finn said quietly. "The community garden's been there since 2009. There's a woman named Mrs. Kellner who doesn't want to sell her house." Voss looked at him. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then, slowly, he put his pen in his jacket pocket and picked up his notebook and walked out of the park. Finn stood at the still fountain until the dark came all the way in. Then he walked home. His hand closed around the coin, and he thought about what it meant to give something up when you knew exactly what you were giving up. He thought it probably meant something. He figured he had time to find out. The council vote on the 14th went against Voss. Not because of magic, because 12 residents showed up and spoke for 2 hours. And because the council member representing that district had always been uncomfortable with the deal. And now, free of whatever pressure had been bending him toward yes, voted his conscience. Finn wasn't one of the 12 who spoke. He was in the back of the room, and he didn't know most of them, and it didn't matter. It happened without him. Things that are right have a way of eventually happening without anyone having to be the hero. He found out later that Meridian's union drive succeeded. He found out about that in the paper, a small article, 3 paragraphs. He cut it out, actually cut it out, physically, with scissors, which he hadn't done since a school project in 3rd grade, and put it on the wall above his desk. He didn't find out about Mrs. Kellner, but he hoped she kept her house. He figured she probably did. The perfect day streak ended, of course. The morning after the fountain went still, Finn spilled coffee on his shirt, and his bus was 6 minutes late, and the copy shop was out of paper stock, and he had to call 3 suppliers before finding one who could deliver by Thursday. It was an ordinary bad day, the kind he'd had hundreds of. He moved through it with the automatic competence of long practice, and went home tired at 6:30, and ate leftover pasta, and felt, underneath the ordinary tiredness, something he spent a few minutes trying to identify before he got it. He felt fine. Not good, exactly. Not the elevated, lit-from-within feeling of the lucky weeks. But fine, genuinely, solidly fine in a way that didn't depend on anything external. That wasn't waiting to be confirmed or disappointed by the next notification, or the next door, or the next unexpected deposit. He thought about the week before the coin. The week of cereal, and silence, and the diploma in its cardboard tube, and the ceiling stain that looked like nothing. And then he thought about the week after the coin, and he noticed, for the first time, really noticing, that the difference wasn't as enormous as he'd been treating it. The Maya thing, he'd been good at talking to her. He'd been good at that before the coin, at Derek's party. His instinct to research Voss, he'd done that entirely on his own, with his own mind, following threads with patience and care that the coin hadn't given him. It had always been there. His natural ability to notice things, to be curious, to care about what was right, none of that had been installed by a piece of old metal in a fountain. The coin hadn't made him good at things. It had just arranged for people to notice. He'd been the same person the whole time. The coin had just turned the light on. He sat with that for a while. He called Maya that night. Not texted, called, which felt like something, the way things that seem small often are the large things in disguise. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, are you busy? It's a good book, but I've been having trouble staying in it. What book? One about a man who inherits a lighthouse and doesn't know how to feel about it. That's a lot to feel things about, right? A pause, and in it, he could hear the particular quality of her thinking. Are you okay? You sound, I don't know, different. Good different or bad different? A moment. Just honest, she said. You sound honest. He laughed, and it was a real laugh, unguarded and warm. And she laughed too. And they talked for an hour about the Lighthouse book and about what it felt like to suddenly be responsible for something old and permanent and yours. And he didn't think about luck once. The last thing Finn did that night, before he turned out the light, was take the cardboard tube from the corner of his room, peel off the gold sticker, and open it. The diploma slid out stiffly, the way things do when they'd been contained too long. He unrolled it on his bed and smoothed the edges flat, and read it, just read it, the whole thing, his name in the middle in the formal script that universities use for the words they want to mean something. Finn Calloway, Bachelor of Arts in Communications, awarded with all the rights and privileges thereof. He'd earned it. He'd done the work, the actual work, the 4 years of papers and exams and group projects and difficult professors and early mornings and late nights. And no coin had been anywhere near any of it. It was his, cleanly and completely, in a way that the lucky weeks had never been. He put the diploma on his desk, leaning against the wall, facing the room. He'd get a frame for it, not because a diploma on a wall proved anything to anyone else, just because it was true, and truth deserved to be visible. He picked up the old coin from the nightstand where he'd set it, and turned it in his fingers. The worn face on one side, the smooth reverse. An ordinary old coin now, emptied of whatever it had briefly held, going back to being what it had always really been, a piece of metal that had passed through many hands before his, and would pass through many hands after. He thought about throwing it away. He thought about keeping it. He thought about going back to the fountain and returning it to the water, where it had lived for long enough that it might have a sense of home there. In the end, he put it in the small dish on his dresser, where he kept his keys and his transit card and the other small essential things of daily life. Not as a talisman, not as a reminder of magic, just as an object with a history. One of many such objects in the world, which was full of them, if you were the kind of person who paid attention. He turned out the light. Tomorrow would be ordinary. Tomorrow there would be work, and a bus that might be late, and coffee that would probably be fine. Maya would text, or she wouldn't, and either way he would be the person he was. Curious, careful, genuinely interested in the people around him. Bad at self-promotion, good at listening, still learning how to ask for what he needed. Tomorrow, he would hold the door for a stranger, because that was what he did, because that was who he was, because that had never required a coin. He closed his eyes. He slept well. The Magic Coin, a story about what luck can never give you.